Hamilton book, the introduction, Mario, page 11. So he was talking about Zeus, right? And how, right, his standard of right and wrong can be pretty low. So this is on that theme of anthropomorphism. So we'll read a bit of this and then we'll look at the definition sheet. And how there was basically a certain progress, right, towards a more civilized version of the Greek religion. And, right, a more, rather, a less ignoble version of Zeus. So the bottom paragraph?
And Justice became Zeus' companion. That was a new idea. The Buccaneering.
Yeah, a buccaneer is like a pirate. So the chieftains, that's how it's pronounced. Iliad.
Did not want justice. They wanted to be able to take whatever they choose because they were strong, and they wanted a God who was on the side of the strong. But
Hesiod,
who was a passing, living in a poor man's world, knew that the poor must have a just God. He wrote, fishes and beasts and fowl of the air devour one another, but to man, Zeus has given justice. Besides Zeus, on his throne, justice has his seat. These passages show that great and bitter needs of the helpless were reaching out to heavens and changing the God of the strong into the protector of the weak.
Okay, so kind of progress over time, as we're saying. Let's go to page 17. So, James, you want to read the first paragraph? The Greeks did not. You can skip the quote there.
The Greeks did not believe that the gods created the universe. It was the other way about. The universe created the gods. Before there were gods, heaven and earth had been formed. They were the first parents. The Titans were their children, and the gods were their grandchildren.
Okay, so this is also interesting. Well, I mean, the contrast with Christianity is obvious, but even we'll see with the pre-Socratics, like maybe on some level them kind of agreeing with this when they say the universe is divine, some of the early pre-Socratics, but then other pre-Socratics who were saying that God is transcendent, that God is not material. So the reason why we're going through this is because to see how, on the one hand, it'll influence the pre-Socratics, on the other hand, they're going to be disagreeing with it in different ways, because there's about a dozen pre-Socratics. On page 20, right, Zeus and his brothers drew lots for the share of the universe. Poseidon was the ruler of the sea, Hades ruled the underworld, and then Zeus was ruled the sky, but also kind of the land in general. And so he was very powerful. Page 21, Matthew, nevertheless.
Sure. Nevertheless, he was not omnipotent or omniscient either. He could be opposed and deceived. Poseidon dupes him in the Iliad, and so does Hera. Sometimes, too, the mysterious power, fate, is spoken of as stronger than he. Homer makes Hera ask him scornfully if he proposes to deliver from death a man fate has doomed.
Right, so that's very important, right? Because you might think, well, if Zeus is more powerful than all the gods, like, is that kind of like an omnipotent god? Well, no, because an omnipotent god means he's all-powerful. Also, right, so we're going to see with Xenophanes, he's going to have this view of God as omniscient, omnipotent, right? Now, he's a poet, as we're going to see, so he's not going to use those terms. But in a poetic way, that's what he's going to be talking about. Right, Zeus is not omnipotent. He's not omniscient. He can be fooled, and the gods aren't omniscient. So this is the anthropomorphism. They're like basic superhumans. Right, he wants to hide his infidelity from his wife. But then on the other hand, coming back to the idea of him being just, right, representing justice. Zeus never helps liars or those who break their oaths. So it's not innerly consistent, right? On the one hand, he's supposed to not help liars, but then he himself is a liar because he lies to his wife, you see? So this is the anthropomorphism. They're striving for something good, but there's also, it's a blend of good and evil and of truth and confusion and so on. Let's go to page, so that's, for now, that's what we'll read about the gods. Page 39 is about the underworld. So this is on page 39. So this is a bit important because, right, as flawed, there's two sides to the myths, right? On the one hand, they're very morally problematic, to put it mildly. On the other hand, there can be good moral values present as well. And then one of the positives about the Greek religion was that it did hold there was an afterlife, right? And that there was, at least in some cases, reward and punishment in the afterlife. And that too kind of changed over time, from where pretty much everyone went to Hades, and in the time of Homer, which is he's writing in like the 8th century, like 700s BC, something like that. And then as we get closer to like the 500s and 400s BC, when the 300s is when it's like Plato, Aristotle, then they have more of a sense of reward and punishment in the afterlife. Brother? The underworld, page 39.
The kingdom of the dead was ruled by one of the 12 great Olympians, Hades or Pluto, and his queen, Persephone.
Okay, you could skip the next paragraph. Tartarus?
Tartarus and Erebus are sometimes two divisions of the underworld. Tartarus, the keeper of the two, the prison of the sons of earth. Erebus, where the dead pass as soon as they die. Often, however, there is no distinction between the two, and either is used, especially Tartarus, as a name for the entire lower region.
Okay, so the main distinction here is the sons of earth means the Titans. So Tartarus is basically where bad people, extremely bad people are punished. So if you're just living an ordinary life and you're not exceptionally bad, you go to Hades, which is what they're calling the underworld here. But then Tartarus, like Prometheus, Sisyphus, if you remember those things, like the myth of Sisyphus, which were in the book, because they were being prideful, they are in Tartarus. Want to keep reading, brother?
In Homer, the underworld is vague, a shadowy place inhabited by shadows. Nothing is real there. The ghost's existence, if it can be called that, is like a miserable dream. The later poets define the world of the dead more and more clearly as a place where the wicked are punished and the good rewarded.
Right, so in Homer, it's pretty much Hades is just neutral. And then there's a later poet named Pindar, who I think she might quote at some point, who makes it more reward for the good and punishment for the bad. Okay.
In the Roman poet Virgil, this idea is presented in great detail as in no Greek poet. All the torments of the one class and the joys of the other are described at length. Virgil, too, is the only poet who gives clearly the geography of the underworld. The path down to it.
That's okay. Why don't you, well, yeah, I guess that's the main thing. On the arrival, each one is brought before 3 judges, Rhadamanthus, Minos, and Iacchus, who pass sentence and send the wicked to everlasting torment and the good to a place of blessedness called the Elysian Fields. So their version of a happy afterlife is called the Elysian Fields or Elysium. There's a movie called Gladiator that came out many years ago. I'm not saying I necessarily recommend it because it's very R-rated, it's very violent. But sometimes I'll just fast forward certain things. But anyway, he says at the beginning, like they're all getting ready to have a battle, and he says if you're charging into battle and you find yourself going to a field of flowers, that means you're in Elysium. Meaning, be happy because now you're in. And I think at the end of that movie, I think like he sees Elysium or something. Does he die or?
Yeah, he does.
And then his wife and child are waiting for him.
Ridley Scott pagan stuff, but straight up, you know.
But so that's Elysium. That's their belief in like the Elysian Fields, which is a happy place. So that if you're a good person, you'll go to Elysian Field. But that was the change from Homer, where pretty much everyone just went to Hades and just kind of felt sorry for themselves. and wish they had a body again, and wish they could embrace whoever comes and visits them, and they're slowly started to lose their memories, and it's more almost like old age Hades, an extension of old age. Whereas the Elysian Fields is actually a happy place, and then Tartarus is a place of punishment. And the Greek, so the pre-Socratics will mention some of these things, and also the Greek philosophers, like Plato in particular, talks about this, and Socrates. But the idea of a judgment and then different fates is important, right? So as much confusion as there is in their religion, you do want to give them some credit, as opposed to like an atheistic materialism where the message is there's nothing divine, only matter exists, and when you die, everything ends. You could see how this is a bit of a better preparation or ground for Christianity, because they were familiar with the idea of reward and punishment, at least for exceptionally good or bad people. That's how it was in the days of Homer. You had to be really good or really bad to go to a place of reward or punishment. Pretty much everyone went to Hades, which was just the kind of gray, boring place. And the thing is that in the Old Testament, when it talks about the underworld, it is rather similar to that, at least in some texts. Not necessarily every text. There are some texts that do talk about punishment in the afterlife or talk about a happy afterlife. But in some texts, Sheol is like the underworld. It's not really clear that it's happy or bad. So there was a kind of parallel to that in the Old Testament. And then I think similarly, whether it was over time or not, it became clearer that there's also reward and punishment. Because Sheol is not like clearly, it's not typically a place of like torment for the wicked. It's more just like when people die, they go down to Sheol. And I think if you wanted to understand that theologically, you could just say, well, God didn't reveal everything at once, right? He didn't reveal the Trinity until God became man. He didn't reveal the details about the afterlife, but he did say you should be good, but he didn't give all the details about exactly what it would be like. Whereas the New Testament is quite a stark contrast there, because the New Testament is very, very clear about there's two possibilities. There's no shadowy realm where you go. You're either, and then it also has the idea of purgatory. They don't use that term, but right, of if you don't reconcile with the judge before you get there, then you're gonna have to pay once you get there. So it's better to reconcile. That's the idea of purgatory. So, but as kind of showing the how at least the idea of happy, and when Jesus was talking about that, or that was a familiar idea that there could be a happy afterlife. And yeah, that movie that does a good job of showing it. The Gladiator movie. If just for a second, if you want to take out the Wheelwright book, let's go to page 28. So I mentioned, let's see, he has some quotes from Pindar. Yeah, he has this quote from Pindar here that I was thinking of. So next, so on page 20, number 19. So now this is, well actually, why do you read 20 first? Because that's the one from Pindar.
Only those who have been courageous in keeping their souls pure may pass along the highway of Zeus into the palace of Scorpius, where the sea breeze blows about the isles of the blessed.
Right, so this is, I think, like 500, so a couple of centuries after Homer, like 300-400 years after Homer. And you see now it's becoming more clear, Pindar, right? Because, I mean, people are making this stuff up right there. It's not like it's divine revelation. So he's thinking, no, it makes more sense that if you keep your soul pure from evil, then you would go to a happy place, right? You wouldn't just go to this underworld that's dim and gloomy. Right, so that idea of purity, right, passing on the highways, it's kind of like in the Gladiator film, right? He sees a road with his wife and children down the road right after he dies. So that's that kind of, you could call it nostalgia, but that nostalgia corresponds to something that is actually, right, truth, that the soul is immortal and that, right, there's an afterlife, even though they had no philosophical proof of that. Number 19.
Thrice blessed are they who have beheld these mysteries before going down to Hades. They alone will have life there. The others will suffer utter wretchedness.
Right. So, yeah. So that's the mystery religion, which was basically a more kind of personal kind of cult than the public cult of the big temples. And so, important point is, once again, trying to make some distinction between just everyone going down to Hades, unless you're like Prometheus or Sisyphus. There's only a couple of people. And then, as she mentioned in the Hamilton book, as Edith Hamilton mentions, there's the Iliad and the Odyssey, but then the great Roman epic is called the Aeneid by Virgil. It parallels the Odyssey quite a bit. And so in the book 6 of the Aeneid, the same way that in book 11 of the Odyssey, Homer goes down to Hades and talks to people. He sees Hercules, he sees like his dad, all these different people. In the Aeneid, Aeneas, the protagonist, he goes down to the underworld and sees all these people and all these different things. And there's much more of a sense there. But there's a lot more people who are being punished. Pretty much all the villains of the myth are all being punished with appropriate punishments. So I forget, but there's women carrying these jugs that are always dripping empty. So they're trying to fill the whatever, but they can't because they're constantly going back and forth. By the time they get to where they're going, the jugs have all emptied out. So it's very kind of symbolic for, I guess, frustration. So that's Aeneid. Aeneid has a whole thing about all these different people who are now in, basically being punished for doing evil things. Okay. Let's read number 21. Jake?
When your soul leaves the light of the sun, you will enter upon the right-hand path, if you have kept all the laws well and faithfully.
So kind of interesting. Remember in Scripture, like the sheep are on the right, the goats are on the left. That seems to just be kind of a universal. Now we're going to talk about archetypes a little bit later. That just seems to be a basic archetype. It's not unique to the New Testament, of the right as being like where the good people go and the left being where the bad people go. Right? This is from a tomb inscription, as you can see. So some of those archetypes are just universal. It kind of makes sense, right, that people do have some sense of the immortality of the soul and that there has to be justice. Because oftentimes there's not justice in the present world, but there has to be maybe justice in the next world, next life. Okay?
Rejoice in the utterly new experience of emerging from your human condition and becoming a God. You have fallen as a kid into its mother's milk. Hail, hail, as you travel on the right through the holy meadows and groves of Persephone.
So see how, because it's not like Catholicism where we have a magisterium, we like ecumenical councils with like statements. It's Greek religion. It's pretty loose, right? You can just kind of write what you want on your tombstone. So this person is turning Hades into a happy place because Persephone's, that's where Hades is, and Persephone's is the queen of Hades. And Hades, as Edith Hamilton mentions, right, it's his name, but it's also the name of the place. So once again, putting forth the idea of a happy afterlife. One important thing here is to use the word God. So this is important, that the word God is used much more fluidly and loosely. Using the word God in a very clear sense, that actually is really thanks to Revelation with a capital R. So it's thanks to Revelation, like the Old Testament and the New Testament, that we as Catholics know to use the word God with a capital G for only one being. And right, so the word God is much looser. Now, typically it refers to the Olympian gods, right? Obviously, that are in the Hamilton book. But then, in a sense, the epithet that's always given to the gods is that they're immortal, right? They're immortal gods. And so when you die, you become immortal. So basically this tomb inscription is saying you become a god. You become like the immortal gods, right? It doesn't mean that you become a god like Zeus or Hera, because that would make no sense, right, in the context of Greek religion. But they're using God in a very loose sense. They use it in a much more loose sense than we do, because we have, thanks to Revelation, like crystal clear monotheism. There's only one God, right? That's kind of the whole message of the Old Testament, as you guys all know, right? There's only one God. But here, God, there's many gods, there's greater gods, there's lesser ones, there's minor ones, there's ones that we don't really know about. And so, in a sense, what defines them all is that they're immortal. So in that sense, when you die, you become immortal, you become like a god. So that's important because in their monotheism, as I explained, they use the word God inclusively. So we use the word God exclusively, right? Like I was talking about logic class, right? Makes sense? There's only one God, exclusive of anything and everyone else. If I say, you're a god at playing chess, that's a pure metaphor, right? I don't actually mean that, right? So we use an exclusive sense. They use the word God inclusively to where it can mean, as we saw, even the immortal soul here, they're calling a God, right? We would never do that, correct? But then again, see, it's God with lowercase g. And even the Greek monotheists are going to use it in an inclusive sense. So for them, there is a God who's omnipotent and omniscient, but they're not necessarily denying the Greek gods. But what they are saying is that they're not anthropomorphic. So this is Xenophanes, who we're going to see next thing after we talk about the myths. So they keep the Greek gods, what they do, but in a non-anthropomorphic sense. Now, is that still the Greek gods? No. But the point is, in the context of the culture where they're living, in order not to be exiled and shipped off to the desert, they basically say, well, sure, there's a Zeus, but he doesn't have a body at all. So that means that pretty much everything that's said about him in the myths is false. But that was their way of kind of dealing with the fact that they're living in, as I mentioned before, a society where religion and politics were intertwined kind of inextricably. If you were Greek, you worship the Greek gods. By the way, it's the same thing in Hinduism, right? You might think, I guess none of you guys are going to be missionaries to India, but I mean, it is kind of fascinating from that perspective. Like what we're learning about here, polytheism, anthropomorphic polytheism. Now, of course, Hinduism is not identical, but still, there are a lot of similarities between kind of basic Greek polytheism and Hindu polytheism. There's many, many gods. They're presented anthropomorphically and so on and so forth. Male, female, all that. So, okay, let's look at, all right, so we talked about the afterlife. We saw Pindar progress, right, towards, in that direction. The word God is inclusive, it's vague, it can mean God with a capital G, as we'll see in the Xenophanes, or it can mean lowercase g. All right, so let's go to the definition sheet, and let's read Odyssey, and then we'll talk about the characteristics. Let's see, who's next? Robert, you want to read on page 3? Odyssey?
Oh, okay.
You see it there?
Yeah. Odyssey. Odysseus' adventures, e.g. Cyclops, after fall of Troy as he returns to Ithaca. Importance of the individual, divine retribution for Ares, hubris.
Okay, so, right, it's a whole story just surrounding him, and important to the individual meaning, also kind of the interiority, right, his travails, his everything he's going through. I mean, if you were to read the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Odyssey, you can just see there's all kinds of differences. The Epic of Gilgamesh is certainly, I would consider that part of the primordial tradition, right? I mean, it's thousands and thousands of years old. So we're not saying only Greek stuff is the primordial tradition, but there are very striking differences. It just doesn't have that, precisely like the individual seems less important. It's more that he's the national hero who, defeats the monsters. It's much more mythical in that sense. And Homer, it seems much more like Odysseus is a real person who then, it's been spruced up with some mythical, fantastic elements. And then divine retribution for arrogance, well, right, that's common to all the myths. Okay.
Later, considered to be symbolic for the journey of life and the practice of virtue.
So after philosophy came along, then people would write commentaries on the Odyssey and take it as symbolic for, which you could see, the symbols are actually pretty obvious, right? Like the sirens, nowadays we'll still talk about like the siren song, right? Don't listen to the siren song if, I don't know, if you, don't go to the bar and have a drink if you know you're gonna end up drinking too much, or, you could see the symbolism is pretty obvious for that kind of thing. So they were aware of that, and they actually wrote commentaries on it, saying that it was showing you how to go through, and also the many trials that he experiences. I mentioned that movie, The Return, which once again, if not for a couple of scenes that made it rated R, it was quite good. But like he says, well, I can't escape from the Trojan War. It's just from the time he gets back to Ithaca to the end. And he's like, now here I find myself at war again, because the suitors are basically taking advantage of the situation and, you know, eating and drinking his wife out of house and home. And so it's kind of reflecting the human condition, really, of life having challenges. Okay, so before we read that, so let's just start. Let's wrap up with the mythology book here. So, what are some characteristics of the male and female deities, the gods and goddesses? Just to analyze it a bit and to kind of spend some time with the anthropomorphism, right? To kind of see, this is what the priestly codices are reacting against, right? Is this anthropomorphism, which is making the gods human. So what would be some, and then, I mean, I guess we could do positive and negative. We don't even need that many. It's not like you need 20 characteristics. But positive and negative for each. I guess start, Ryan.
The female were vain and beautiful.
Okay. All right, yeah, you're right, I guess so. That's anthropomorphism, right? Aphrodite has beautiful, I don't know, hair, eyes. She's not overweight.
Yeah.
They have like a body. It's not. They don't really have a sense of like a spiritual god.
They prize the virginity of Athena and Artemis in particular.
Okay, yeah, they do, which is
Purity.
kind of maybe surprising, but shows you maybe another kind of preparation for the Gospels there, that was viewed. And also just, you know, the good side of human nature, natural law.
For a negative on the female, vindictive, like Hera.
Good, right. A lot of what happens, and even in the Odyssey, it's right. It's because one of them is angry at him that he has to journey for 20 years.
That's Poseidon.
Yeah, I wrote down. I have a table where I wrote down who was angry at who. But the point is that exactly right. They're it's anthropomorphic.
They're all deceptive, both male and female.
Okay, yeah, because remember we talked about Zeus philandering and then trying to hide it, and then
Hera deceives him in the war.
what's that again?
Hera
During the
deceives
Trojan War, right? Okay.
They all commit acts of atrocity, especially rape.
Especially this.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know, sexual
Sexual deviance.
sexual misbehavior, to put it mildly.
Sexual deviance.
Yeah, it's very. Yeah, I mean, and even deviance in the sense that there's the whole area of Greek homosexuality that was pretty, really, in my opinion, kind of the low point. It was that aspect, even like pedophilia and stuff that would, that's reflected in the art. That unfortunately was part of the culture.
There was that point, I think it was right before Troy, when they asked, I think it was Athena that asked for the sacrifice of Agamemnon's daughter.
Right, Iphigenia.
Yeah.
I think it was Apollo.
Or Apollo, maybe?
Yeah, Apollo, because the winds. But I mean, is that I don't know if that's a characteristic, or is it?
Yeah.
I don't know I don't know how it get. Yeah.
Indifference.
Indifferent to human life.
Yeah. Because it's like, especially with Zeus at the end
Yeah,
of the
okay.
Trojan War, he puts so much emphasis on the Trojans, and then he just falls out. He just gets bored, and he's like, I don't care, whatever.
Okay. Who hasn't gone?
Pride.
Okay. In what sense?
In terms of like they each god thinks they're kind of better than each other.
Right. They can be right. Okay. Yeah, that works. Christian?
They have characteristic powers associated with their office and their
Good,
nature.
good, right.
So
That's good, because that's right, exactly, powers that are based on their office and their nature, exactly. So, anything positive about the male, just so we have something?
I mean, like their strength, you know.
Okay, I mean, sometimes, justice, right, sometimes, as she said, Zeus is just, he'll punish someone if they're bad. So it's not consistent, but he does represent that side as well. Like, we read that in the book, huh?
Artemis is considered very cunning.
Okay, but let's have some positive about it.
I mean that in a kind of like a good way, in a sense, because he's, he has.
So Artemis is the goddess of like the night and hunting.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh,
Now her brother is Apollo.
I'm thinking of Demeter.
Demeter is the goddess of like grain.
Who's the messenger?
Hermes.
Hermes.
Hermes or Mercury.
Yeah, Hermes.
Okay, you think of Hermes.
Yes.
And what about him?
He's very
Cunning in a good sense?
Yeah, he's very
Sharp.
Like
he's
sharp or like, yeah, that's, I remember him like kind of solving problems. Okay, yeah.
Just call it wise.
Dionysius is supposed to be very happy and joyful because he's always drunk.
Yeah. Okay. All right, well, that's pretty good. Okay.
They all kind of represent the apex of whatever they.
Exactly. That's what we're trying to get at here, is that they're the apex of whatever. Well, really, the apex of their role, and I think the role has to do with there's a Jungian. It's this idea of archetypes, right? That basically their functioning is archetypes. And I think you can see that because, right, this is kind of what you'd expect from a virtuous woman, right? Let's say that she would be, chaste in some sense, right? That she would be, I don't know, merciful. The female goddesses do kind of exemplify that at times, right? Because that's, I mean, they're like humans. They're inconsistent. Sometimes they're very good. Sometimes they're very bad. And then the female goddess is also vain. Remember the someone is not invited to the party. I think it's one of the Fates or Furies, and so she throws the apple in. It says for the fairest. Then the three goddesses get into it. They're jealous of each other, and so it's just it's a whole huge disaster. But that's kind of that could happen. That in terms of it's reflecting the bad side of maybe the feminine nature, and same thing here. Like this is reflecting maybe the vicious, the bad side of the male nature, and then the virtuous side of it. But so it's in it, what they're showing you is just they're archetypes of, like you were saying, Christian, right? The office and the nature of what they represent. And this book called God. I mean, it's obvious, but this book called Gods for Every Man that I think I put in the biography. She's like a Jungian person. She's actually a psychotherapist, but she wrote an excellent book. And so what she explains how like Zeus is a father archetype. Apollo is like the son archetype. Apollo is the favored son, right? He's always like glorious, he's wise, he's athletic, he's young. The other one, the smith, Hephaestus is like the less favored son. He's a cripple. They're always talking about he's the most ugly. It's kind of ironic because then he marries Aphrodite, who's the most beautiful. Then same thing, like Hera is like a mother goddess. There's mother goddesses, daughter goddesses. Artemis is a daughter goddess, right? So they're representing like father, mother, son, daughter archetypes. And then there's like basically this book, the Bolan lady who's Jungian, she points out that, right, there's like three different father archetypes. Like Zeus is a very joyful father, very cheerful, which is wonderful, but then he's also kind of can be very dishonest. Then Hades is very serious, like not fun at all, but he's basically reliable. Like Hades, he only kidnaps someone once, and then he marries her. And he's stable. So he's stable, and then that's it. but he has like he's never funny, he's never amusing, he's never colorful. And then Poseidon is kind of in between.
So I'd like to comment that like the ancient Greek religion, it wasn't just like a spiritual, theological, psychological thing. Like the gods and religion ingrained themselves like socially, structurally, like every day. For instance, back then they didn't have like fences to organize the barriers of their property. They would have what are called herms, which are like statues of Hermes with a giant phallus on it, and that would be
there's another side to it, right?
And the idea is the god of Hermes god, the god of boundaries and crossing boundaries, and so.
What a way to enforce a boundary.
So like it wasn't just like we go to church on Sundays and that's kind of
Right.
how it is. Their gods like permeated every structure of their day. And
Right. So it was religious, it was political, but it was also cultural. Like the culture, and it's a kind of pity that we've lost that very much. And as priests, maybe you can try to bring that back. You know, when I went to Spain for a year to learn Spanish. And it's amazing because there was still a fair amount of a Catholic culture, but we've really lost that. Like even Halloween, it's not really a Catholic. I mean, I'm not going to say you can't go to Halloween. Some people will say you can't even do it. I'm not going to say that, but I definitely not a Catholic. It's true, it's All Hallows Eve, but dressing up like Superman and Batman, it doesn't really. It's not per se Catholic, right? I guess Christmas still is. Christmas and Easter are, but Easter it tends to become more like the Easter Bunny, and so yeah, we've kind of unfortunately we've lost that, and that's something that maybe have small ways there are to regain it. But yes, that's I think in the Middle Ages it was more like that was kind of the high point because the culture was Christian, the holidays were all Christian and Catholic, and so. Yeah, that's something that was part of it that not there anymore, huh?
I think one positive aspect that I saw, and it seems like she paints Prometheus in a fairly good light in this one, is like he just displays a bit of like pity towards mankind and like
Right.
self-sacrifice by like giving mankind's light for the first like fire,
Right.
the first time, even knowing that he's kind of like rubbing the other gods the wrong way.
Well, and this is why it's good to know about the myths, because like Marx, he's going to say Prometheus is the hero because he wants to reject religion, and so he's saying, you see how the gods are out to get you, religion is out to get you. So really up until like Marx, Nietzsche, they'll all refer back to the myths because it's part of kind of Western culture. Right, there are archetypes, male and female, and then also father, son, daughter, different kinds of fathers, different kinds of mothers, all those. So what they're doing is, though, are they telling us about God or are they telling us about humanity? Well, they're really telling us about humanity. So in that sense, I think a way to view the myths from a positive light is to say, well, insofar as they're archetypes, right, they do have a kind of that psychological value of, I mean, also the temperaments, right? So when you see that Zeus is very outgoing, he's cheerful, but then he also has the flaw of being, he has his downside, right? Do you guys know what the four temperaments? Sanguine, melancholic. Then Hades would be like melancholic. He's very serious, but he's also reliable. Choleric, like Hephaestus is always working hard. He's always at his forge, working away. And then phlegmatic means like more laid back. And the Bolin book, she doesn't talk about the four temperaments, but it's clear from the way she presents them that like certain of the deities represent phlegmatic. I don't know what's her name, Hestia, I guess. I only read the one called Gods for Every Man. She has another one called Gods for Every Woman that I didn't find as interesting. But Hestia is like the goddess who is very, I don't know, she doesn't really do anything. She's just the goddess of the heart. So that would be like an extreme phlegmatic kind of personality where she doesn't need to be like in the limelight and things like that. So, but as taking them as archetypes of human and as having a literary, but maybe even more so a psychological value. Like I was saying before about like Sisyphus or the woman who were being punished with, I think, it's because they killed their father, right? So the crimes are pretty severe, and they're being punished for that, or they killed their husbands by carrying the jugs that are always emptying. So that's kind of an archetype once again for like futility, as you guys can see. So, okay, so I guess just the maybe a positive side. If you read them not like as this is how, not as moral exemplars, but just for insight into human nature, then I think it's worthwhile or interesting. Okay, but of course that's not what not really religious, not per se, not telling us about God as He truly is. Huh?
There are some parts in the book where it does cover human sacrifice, like we were talking about before with Agamemnon's daughter,
right?
And also Hyacinth, his sacrifice.
Yeah.
And the flowers come up.
Right. It's on the chronology. The Trojan War is like 1,000 or something, or 1050. So it seemed like in 1000 BC there were still remnants of that, and then by the time Hesiod is writing in 700, that doesn't happen anymore. They consider it uncivilized. So there was progress in that. But certainly, right, we don't want, there's two extremes with the Greeks. You can either kind of demonize them, and certainly like Protestants might do it, even Catholics might tend to do that, like just demonize them. And it's true, there were very, very bad things, like the Greek homosexuality and even pedophilia that's very shocking and evil, right? But then on the other hand, there were very good things, like I said, the archetypal value of so to have it right, not to completely whitewash them, but on the other hand, not to pretend that, not to say that everything they were just completely utterly corrupt, like the total corruption model. Okay, so is that good? So all right, well then let's look at Hesiod here. So the reason to do that is just that anthropomorphism, the form that it takes. It is of psychological interest regarding archetypes, so it's not like it's just completely utter waste. But as far as talking about what God Himself is really like, it's very extremely limited value because it's telling us about humans really. Okay, so I keep mentioning Hesiod, so let's read. And as I say, I just for pronunciation purposes, I put the accent on there to help you pronounce it. But don't put it on there, it's only for pronunciation. Okay.
What are we reading right now?
So the definition sheet.
Oh, okay.
So we're done with the Edith Hamilton book, so you don't have to bring that anymore. And now we're going to segue from the definitions into the wheelwright. So on the bottom of page 3, who's that? Or Robert, have you read?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, then Ricky, you want to?
Hesiod, 2 works: Theogony, the birth of the gods; anthropomorphic gods, immortal but not eternal, since they have a beginning.
Okay, so eternal means like it has no beginning in the strict sense of the term. So that when we say they're immortal, right, that's another difference from, and Xenophanes is going to point that out. Okay.
Works and days, origins of religious feasts, which are times of rest. Myth of Prometheus, divine law.
Okay, so that's where we have the myth of Prometheus. It's not given in Homer. He doesn't go into it. And then, right, talk about kind of a divine law, like not breaking the law of Zeus, which is certainly a step in the right direction. Religious feasts. So the reason it's called works and days, they did not have Sunday. That's a Jewish thing that we took over. So you just worked all the time unless there was a festival, and then you'd get a couple of days off, like a week off. So most of the days of the year you work, but then every once in a while there's a festival where you rest. So kind of thing we just take for granted, right? That there's a weekend. That's actually a Judeo-Christian thing that didn't exist Although now I think it's spread over the whole entire world. But in the ancient world, there wasn't a day of the week in ancient Greece and Rome.
So
where you
did they
rested.
not have like a 7-day type of week?
No.
They had no concept of that?
They had a calendar with months, but in Greek the months have completely different names than ours. Our months go back to the Romans. Okay, who's next? I guess Matthew. Okay, so it's kind of summarizing all this is mythos versus logos. So we use the Greek term just because, to make clear, we're referring to the contrast between the Edith Hamilton book, which is the whole realm of mythos. It has some good, some bad, but and then logos, reason, which is the pre-Socratics.
Mythos versus logos. Mythos, story or myth, imaginary and emotion-driven justifications for beliefs. A, attributes natural occurrences to gods or spirits, such as fables, legends, etc. B, irrational insofar as rejects inquiry into natural causes.
Right, so obviously the pre-Socratics are going to be critical of the myths. I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that there is some good there in that Jungian sense of an archetype. But it's true. I mean, if you're using it as your version of science, then it's irrational, right? Okay.
I, product of creative imagination. 1, for example, seasonal changes are due to goddesses' emotional states. 2, not the same as belief by infused faith, which does not contradict reason, but rather transcends it. 3, archetypal value regarding psychological aspects of human nature.
Okay. So that's right. We don't want to say that it's just right. Christianity is just another myth, because right, there are important differences. Okay.
And 2, logos, reason. Explanations based on observation and reasoning. A, casual inquiry.
Or causal.
Sorry.
Causal meaning like based on causes.
Causal inquiry. Compare, laws of nature. And B, philosophy and science with the product of intellect.
Okay. Just with Hesiod there, where it says divine law, let's look on page 26 to see where I'm getting that. Zeke, on page 26 of the Socratic book, number 6.
Zeus himself ordained law for mankind. As for fishes and beasts and winged fowls, they may feed on one another without sin, for justice is unknown to them. But to man he gave the law of justice.
Right, so that's a quote from Hesiod's book, Works and Days, which is just a long poem, but it's not very long compared to Homer. Right, a divine law or maybe natural law. Do you want to read number 8?
Although the body of every mortal must give way to overmastering death, yet an image of life lives on, for it alone comes from the gods. It sleeps while the limbs are alive, yet even during sleep it gives to men in many a dream premonitions of happy and disastrous turning points.
Okay, so right, your soul lives on. It's a kind of like an image of you, and he ties it in with dreams. Okay, and then let's look on page 29. We're going to read number 22.
Know thyself. Inscription over the entrance to the temple of Apollo at Delphi.
Okay, next one.
Nothing too much. Greek maxim.
Or nothing in excess. Christian, you want to read 24?
Taught by suffering, drop by drop, wisdom is distilled from pain. Aeschylus, Agamemnon.
Good. So as I was saying before, right, the problem of suffering, but then the positive side of it too, is he's saying. So Aeschylus that's right, the tragedy. And then how about 26?
To see into thy nature, O Zeus, is baffling to the mind. I have been praying to thee without knowing whether thou art necessity or nature, or simply the intelligence of mortals. Euripides, the Trojan women.
Right, so even in the Greek culture, now of course Euripides is contemporary of Socrates, and Euripides is writing after the Pre-Socratics. So the Pre-Socratics are going to say, well, there really aren't anthropomorphic gods, there's just nature. Some of them are going to say that. So you can see the influence of the philosophers there. Okay, so let's go on to Xenophanes, Timothy. So why don't we start off with the anti-anthropomorphism? Let's just start with number 1 on page 32. And maybe next class we can read some of the introduction, but let's just jump into the text for now.
God is one, supreme among gods and men, not at all like mortals in body or in mind.
So this is what the point I was making about using gods in a broad sense, or the word God, because he used the word God with a capital G, but then right away he uses it with lowercase g, right? So we wouldn't do that normally. Now I say normally because in the Psalms it actually does that. Sometimes it says like the Lord sits above the gods. So it is using gods with the lowercase g, but of course we know there's only one God, right? So that would be the thing to compare it to here, right? That the same way the Psalm says God sits above the gods, that there is this, when he's saying God is one, right? Okay, and not at all like mortals in body or mind. That's anti-anthropomorphic. Go ahead.
It is the whole of God that sees, the whole that thinks, the whole that fears.
So the first one you would call a divine unicity, that there's only one God. And the second one is this idea that there's a divine, arguably, right, simplicity, that God doesn't have eyes that he sees with and ears that he hears with. Because remember, with like Zeus, right, Zeus has a body, he sees things, he hears things, right? Even if he's kind of a superman. But God doesn't have organs. He doesn't have bodily organs in order to know things. He's just like a mind that just knows things. Number 3.
Without effort, he sets everything in motion by the thought of his mind.
Okay. So, right, once again, God is a divine mind. What would that be? That without effort, he can move everything? Anybody? Omnipotence, right. If it's effortless and he can move everything, then that's basically that's definition of omnipotence, right? To have power over everything, which is why it's omni, or all powerful. And then if it doesn't cost him any effort, okay. So you see, this is basically how did Xenophanes come up with this, right? Well, he's not giving you demonstrative arguments like you'll see in Plato or Aristotle. He's a poet. And so he's coming up with this by reasoning in contrast to the anthropomorphism and trying to correct it. Also rather significant, he mentions somewhere that he's, number 24, Matthew, on page 36. By now it is
67 years that my thoughts have been tossed restlessly up and down the land of Hellas.
Hellas means like Greece.
Okay. And when that period of wandering began, I was already 25 years old, if I remember rightly such bygone details.
So 67 plus 25 is 92, so he's 92 years old when he's writing this. So if you wonder kind of how he came up with this, I think that's a factor. Like, he's been around for a very long time, and he's had a chance to think about what's good about the myths, what's bad, what could make sense, what doesn't make sense. And he's come up with this idea that really there shouldn't be many gods who are fighting with each other, bickering, deceiving each other. That's all anthropomorphism. Rather, there should be one God. So do you see how it's kind of, by negating what's bad in this and keeping what's true, he came up with monotheism. And you can see how that's a very great interest for us as, Catholics. So what we'll do next time, I know on the syllabus I said we would do Thales first. Why don't we just jump right into Xenophanes, because since we just did the myths. So why don't we just follow the order of the book? So first we'll do Xenophanes, and then we'll do Thales. So for homework though, you could read page 31, 39, and then also start reading Milesians. We'll finish Xenophanes and move on to Thales. And I don't know if you have a quiz because we haven't covered most of the vocabulary.